Welcome to We Are Not Here to Tick a Box with David Kane and Debbie Hayes. Episode 12, Who Are You Willing to Become?
So David, in the last episode, we were talking about who is it that we want to become. And I think we've both got quite interesting stories to share, really, in terms of perhaps where we found ourselves at those crossroad points in life, or what we might call watershed moments, or the wake-up calls, whatever you want to call them. I think we've both had some quite interesting experiences that maybe would be useful for our listeners to just to have that little bit of history, of how we arrived to where we are.
Yeah, I think so, because, we talk about a lot of topics, but people will probably want to know a bit more about us, and this may be a way of us doing that. And you're right. I mean, we have both had very different experiences over the years, but it's led us to this point. It's led us to this podcast, hasn't it? If my life hadn't gone my way, your life hadn't gone your way, we certainly wouldn't be sat here today. Things happen for reasons. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Who are you willing to become? And I love that phrase. And again, in the last episode, I spoke about certain quotes and phrases that I've learned through reading more, doing more courses, learning about myself, and that one cropped up. Who are you willing to become? And it's all about taking responsibility, isn't it? That's where it was coming from. In order to do anything in life, you need to take responsibility for you. That's what you need to do, or else you're just not going to do it. And
if you don't, then if you're not willing to take the responsibility that lies with somebody else, doesn't it? So you've given all your power away to the external circumstances or to external people, and then you, to be honest, you can become the victim to that, because you sat waiting, and you can sit and wait for a long time, and until we take that ownership back and take that responsibility back, then it's very difficult for any sense of momentum and traction to really happen.
Yeah.
Or it could be easily taken away from you again.
Yeah, and I mean, I've hinted at it a couple of times. My life over a 7-year period just went on a downward spiral from a mental health perspective, and it did. And what I wasn't doing is I wasn't listening to myself. My self-awareness became pretty much non-existent. I concentrated on presenting an illusion to people, and that illusion wasn't a very nice one at times. I lost myself. And I think that's the important thing. It'd be interesting to hear more about your story as well. From a personal perspective, you lose yourself. You lose your identity. You're cool. You know who you are. It's like, your values and your beliefs, that we've been brought up with. And, you can have your views on them, you can. Again, we talked about wise minds in the last episode. A lot of our values and beliefs stem from our families, from our parents. And don't get me wrong, the vast majority of them are probably very, very good. But we've got to remember that their parents was a different generation, and what their values and beliefs were probably going to serve us well in this modern world. And that's the same with all generations. So it's about
we're living through different experiences, aren't we?
Completely.
The culture that we're in is different. It's certainly a lot faster, and we have to adapt to that. But we've still got to make those wise decisions within all of that, haven't we?
Well, we're more interconnected, aren't we? We are all, God, I mean, you're only going to go back 3 generations. They didn't have airplanes and they weren't traveling the world, So, we've got to become wiser. We've got to become more accepting. I always say to people, talk about wise minds. I always say to people, it's okay to disagree with people on whatever it may be. Whatever it may be. And, we're not going to go into these areas, but, politics, religion, all the rest of it, these things that can often separate us. Actually, look, rather than it separate us, let's just accept the fact that we have different views and opinions. And as long as we respectfully disagree, as long as, it's okay if you've got different views to me, that's fine. I may not agree with your perspective, but I can respect that in your world, that is your perspective. I don't have to agree. I just need to be respectful that is you and not try and change it. So, this bit about who the person that you're willing to become, I think it's only by finding that wise mind, by actually going into those places, that you start to have this this perspective. And actually, I'd lost myself. I'd completely lost myself, the person that
Yeah.
I wanted to be. And I had to climb out, and it was a really difficult climb.
And did you find there, just talking about acceptance, that part of that journey was actually giving yourself grace and acceptance for where you were, and acceptance for perhaps some of the emotions you're experiencing? I think that can be quite a big thing for people. If we can actually accept where we are, accept some of those huge emotions that we're going through, and then we can move through them. Was that something, or I mean, you might have not looked at it in that perspective, I don't know.
I think it's a great point, well made, in the fact that, you know, in my depression, you know, you're in a place where, and you said this, I can't remember, you've said this, where you become a victim. You put the onus on others, because you're not looking inward, you look out. And, you know, and that's from a perspective of, you know, and there's a brilliant quote, again, you know, we're talking quotes in this series: hurt people hurt people. What a great quote that is. Great quote. Hurt people hurt people. If you're hurting, you will hurt others around you, not because you want to, but because, again, we go back to that, because that's where you're at, because you're hurt, that hurt you will present to other people, and actually you'll start to hurt them. So these are really difficult life lessons that I've learned. And like I say, I had to sit there and go, well, you know, once I accepted this is where my life had got me, I'd morphed into a lot of things. I think my career morphed me into a certain way of thinking. You know, I think when you're in an industry where targets are the be all and end all, you lose the ability to say anything but at all costs, we've just got to achieve this. And I morphed into somebody that, over a long period of time, both professionally and personally, that you know, when I reflect back now, I didn't like that person. And I'm not blaming anybody. I made, you know, Robert De Niro said, didn't he? Like we said in the last episode, talent is in the choices that you make. I made some bad choices. I could have, if I was brave enough, and if I was wise enough, and if I was accepting enough to see some of these things and make changes. But I was on a conveyor belt with no exit, and it was going to a very, very dark place. And it was only when I got to that dark place, and it was like the wake-up call that I needed, that, you know, for the last 2 years, it's been a voyage of discovery of, right, how, why, and what can I help other people with, so that they don't have to get to where I got to make these profound changes that they need to make. That's not to say I'll have all the answers. We always say this. We won't have all the answers. We're imperfect. All of us are imperfect. But I do think that by having a personal story to tell, as well as what we've learned and the skills that we've got in a professional sense, I think those two things married together, I think they're very, very powerful. I mean, if you've got one or the other, you're probably not going to fulfill the whole brief or the whole connection with someone. I think you've got both. I think you can become more relevant. I certainly think that you can engage more. And I think that, you know, the work that we do on the other side is more profound. And that's, you know, I don't know, I've rattled on a bit there. Hopefully that come across about right. But yeah, you've got to put the graft in. But, you know, in order to do that, you've got to take that level of responsibility. What's your thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking about how you're saying how you got sort of focused in on the targets, and what that makes me sort of, what I was like, yeah, actually what we need to do is we've got to look at our broader targets, haven't we? Because if in businesses, if we are just focused and zoomed in on singular things rather than taking a holistic approach, this is where perhaps some of these I guess these rabbit holes are formed. So we've got to broaden out what are the real targets, what is it that we really want to achieve, because there has to be we've got to look at what the consequences of some of those targets are, haven't we? I was having this conversation with my son the other day around how we've made societal choices over the last 10 years that I'm not personally convinced are good for us as a society. And I think because people have become singularly focused on profits, but actually the broader scale consequences to humanity, I'm question. And so I think we've got to broaden out, haven't we, as to what are the real targets? Where do we really want to to go. And that's certainly my take on the world anyway, is that I suppose even going back to my quote last time, you know, until you value yourself, you won't value time. Until you value time, what you can do with that. So if I was to value myself, or even if you look at that in a business context, well, right, okay, if we're valuing ourselves, there's so many aspects to that, isn't there? It's not one dimensional. So we've got to look at how do we value ourselves in a physical sense.
Join us next week to get to know Debbie and I a little bit better
mentally,
in our Christmas
emotionally,
episode.
Spiritually, because all of that combined makes us. So maybe it's time just to sort of broaden out and start looking at targets in a much bigger context, and what are the consequences of those things, and actually how can the consequences of doing one thing, how can that consequence be supportive to these other areas rather than being detrimental? Because I think when we can really build it from that level, it actually gets quite exciting. But it takes perspective, and we've got to zoom out of some of these targets that perhaps are just too singular.
Well, I mean, the word target is an outcome. It's an output. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but whether it be on an individual basis or an organisational basis, I'm a great believer that if you concentrate on the inputs, the outputs take care of themselves. So if you want to grow profits in a business, manage the inputs. Colleague development, absolutely pivotal. Human experience in the workplace, absolutely pivotal. You get those things right, actually, profits, volume, customer satisfaction takes care of themselves. But what tends to happen especially around the beginning of a year, is new budgets come in, and a lot of the times it's you know, right, we want more of you for less money. That's the reality. And you know, it's probably for a different episode, but you know, would an organisation achieve more if actually the budget was set at a level that inspired overachievement to what actually would be the goal that we're looking for, as opposed to maybe losing the first 4 weeks of a new year, people feeling hard done to? And I've experienced this, you know, and I have experienced this over my career, you know, and don't get me wrong, yes, we want business growth, but, you know, if you're suddenly putting somebody's targets up to the point where, you know, they're looking at it and it's almost like it's too great. And actually, in order for me to earn from a monetary, and you say, well, it's about money. Well, yeah, because money's security for families. You know, people tend to set the lifestyle up to the level that they earn, their earning capability. If all of a sudden you're taking that further away, some people will aspire to that, but equally, a lot of people won't aspire to that.
Oh, yeah.
And as an organisation, you can't afford for half of your team to not be aspiring to something. So again, this whole bit about how do you generate your targets? Would you be better off targeting the inputs, looking to grow the inputs, knowing full well that by doing that, we have got far better workforce, we've got far better individuals. I mean, some of the managers, you know, a great quote, I'm a big rugby league fan, and a guy came to the Warrington Wolves, my rugby team, in the late 2000s, 2007, 2008. And his mantra was dead easy, dead straightforward. You know, Warrington had never won anything in my lifetime, and he came to the club and basically said, "My job is to make my players better, both as professionals and human beings." In his time with our club, we won 3. You know, we won 3 Challenge Cups. We got to grand finals. We didn't win the grand finals, but at least we were getting there. And his entire mantra was, "I make better players." And last year, this is an interesting one. He went to a different club last year, Hull KR. They finished bottom of the Super League table 2 years running. And last year, he got them into the semi-finals in 1 year. And again, when you hear him being interviewed, he always talks about, "My job is to develop my people, both personally and professional, and make them better human beings." And the outputs is a team that finished bottom 2 years ago actually knocked out my team, the Warrington Wolves. There you go, interesting. So I think there's a big topic area there without question.
Yeah, because I guess the summary there is actually we have got to look much broader, haven't we? And when we can build that connection to ourselves and make ourselves better people in the round, it creates much more expansion, doesn't it? Much better opportunities. And I guess whether that's individually or as a business, it's being in a place where we take that ownership to do that. And I guess we perhaps both experience, and I'm sure there are in a business context as well, sometimes it does take that, you say, those watershed moments or the crossroads or the wake-up calls, whatever we want to phrase them. We all sometimes have to hit that edge to go, it's time for change now.
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing wrong in that. I think if people are in that place, that is part of the human experience. And so if you're there, it's noticing that, come back to notice what you noticed, and go, actually, it's time now to take the reins back, go, this is what the world is trying to point me towards. Time to take the ownership back, time to value you, time to value your time on this earth, and go, right, what do I now choose to do with it?
Absolutely.
Make those discerning choices. Yeah.
It's not easy, it's difficult, but you come out the other side far greater.
Absolutely.
Time has flown by. That's another one where we're already at 15, 16 minutes, and we have said, you know, just to show that we have no partiality, we won't say particularly Nestle brand this time. You know, Twix. You know, Twix and a cup of tea at a time. A Twix and a cup of tea time. That's what we're limited to. But hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully you agree that, you know, we do need to look internally. We need to look at inputs in business. We need to look at ourselves in order to go and become the best versions of ourselves and as a business, without question. And we may, again, you know, I'm sure we'll come and revisit this as we go on. But yeah, Debbie, that's us for another week.
I know. See you next week.
See you next week. Bye for now. Join us next week for episode 13, Ticket to Ride.